Okay. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks especially to Dr. Adam Dean, Corey Lycopolus, and Alex Arnold. We're going to talk in our fourth installment in the Careers for History majors this term with three professionals in the park ranger, in the National Park Service, three park rangers. Dr. Adam Dean is a park ranger in education and interpretation at Valles Caldera National Preserve in Jemez Springs, New Mexico. He's a former professor of history at University of Lynchburg with a BA from UCLA and MA and PhD from the University of Virginia. Corey Lycopolus is also a park ranger at Valles Caldera National Preserve. He has his BFA in photography from Arizona State University and also his Bachelor in Science in Applied Biological Science from Arizona State University. And Alex Arnold is also a park ranger at Valles Caldera National Preserve. He is a BA in history from Penn West, California, and also has another bachelor degree in Parks and Recreation Management, also from Penn West, California. It's really a great pleasure and a great privilege to be able to talk with the three of you. So without further ado, I want to turn the floor over to Dr. Dean, to Adam, to give us a little bit of an introduction to his work.
All right, thanks so much for inviting me, Jeremy. Before we get into working for the National Park Service, I wanted to talk a little bit about where we work in New Mexico and what federal land management actually entails. So who here has been to northern New Mexico? And I can't see anyone, so you'll have to just shout out.
I've been there just briefly.
Just briefly, okay.
Albuquerque.
So a lot of people think of New Mexico as being nothing but desert, but the northern part is quite mountainous. And we work in an amazingly beautiful location. So it's called Valles Caldera. Valles is, of course, Spanish for valleys. And we have these gigantic high alpine valleys called montane grasslands surrounded by peaks. And where this picture was taken is about 100 yards from my office and is about 8,700 feet. So we are high elevation.
I think we're on the first slide still, Adam.
There we go. We're moving to the second one. Were you on the second one now?
No, I'm still seeing the introduction slide.
Oh, really? I'm moving forward. Let's try that again. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, there we are. Alamo
Okay.
Bog.
Is that bog actually a part of the caldera or old volcano?
It is, yeah. So if we go back to that first picture, are you seeing the previous picture?
No, it doesn't. I'm not sure why it's not responding, but
here, is it responding?
Now, yes, okay. There we go.
So just in the interest of efficiency and not fussing with technology, I'll just do it from here. So yeah, this is about 50 yards from my office. This is a wonderful photo that Corey took of Alamo Bog, which is one of the most special places in the park. This is almost kind of a, like the New Mexico license plate, like a turquoise at times. It's not, of course, always green. It's not green now. And I took this picture from the top of La Garita Peak, which is above 10,000 feet in the fall. And you can see the valles or valleys. And then all of Valles Caldera is a caldera. It's a collapsed volcano. So the whole thing went off 1.2 million years ago, sent ash high into the atmosphere, an avalanche of ash on the ground. And once all that stuff was out of the earth, there was nothing holding the earth up. So it collapsed and created a 14-mile wide crater. So it became a National Park Service site in December of 2014 after being public land for about 14 years, managed as its own entity. And even before the Park Service took over, there were frankly a lot of problems with Valles Caldera. It was an ecosystem that had been badly abused and exploited for over 100 years. So one of the biggest problems is high heat, gigantic wildfire that came from fire suppression. The US government suppressed all fires starting in 1911. It came from overgrazing, overlogging, and climate change. And some 70% of the park has burned since 2000. The wetlands and streams were in poor condition from overgrazing. I'll show some photos later of this, but at one point in the biggest valley, there were 35,000 sheep alone, and then later after World War II, some 10,000 cows. Related to overgrazing was 77 miles of livestock fence inhibiting wildlife movement. I think we can all get that pretty easily, right? If you have barbed wire fence everywhere, wildlife cannot move and migrate as they need to. There was 183 old stock tanks that were keeping water from the streams and preventing natural hydrology. There was 1,000 miles of old logging roads and 89,000 acres. So the whole park is basically a square, and that's a lot of miles of logging road in 89,000 acres. I know 89,000 acres is pretty big, but that's a ton of roads. Some of the key apex predators, specifically the Mexican gray wolf and the grizzly bear, were eradicated in the early 20th century. And of course, there's the legacy of colonization. So Valles Caldera has 37 different tribal affiliations, including all 19 pueblos in New Mexico, Diné or Navajo, as well as Apache. So we have a really rich human history. Since you all are history majors, a lot of times when people think of the National Park Service, they think of wilderness, untouched nature. But for the vast majority of our sites, all of those except the ones that are underwater, that's really not true. So humans have occupied the Jemez Mountains in northern New Mexico, where Valles Caldera is, for up to 21,000 years after the recent dating of human footprints farther south in the state at White Sands. A lot of that use.
Yes.
Does someone have a question?
Yeah, how far are you from Clovis?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Do you know, Alex or Corey?
Yeah, we're
Thinking moving into
probably about 3.5 hours or so from Clovis. It is east of New Mexico, or east of us here in New Mexico.
So the artifacts we found in the park date to about 11,000 years, but given the discovery at White Sands, if people are down there at 21,000, they were probably up here as well. And a really fascinating part of that human history is high altitude agriculture. So in the southwest corner of the park, a place called Banco Benito, there are agricultural ruins and villages that belong to the Hamish people. So the word Hemes is Spanish for an indigenous word, which is Hamish, which refers to the Puebloan people that still live here today, still use the mountains, but had over 63 villages in the mountains and plateaus of the Jemez Mountains. So this slide shows, I think, a lot of the damage that happened in the 20th century. So this was when it was in private holdings. Interestingly, the private landowners at the time completely opposed the timber cutting, but they didn't own the timber rights. And so the majority of what is today the preserve was logged between 1963 and 1971. And so you can see the construction of a lot of these roads in the park that were haphazardly built and the complete destruction of the forests. Now, you may be wondering, I said earlier, how does that relate to fire? The problem is when you cut down all the old growth trees, these are the trees that are shading the floor and preventing younger saplings from growing. And so when you take all of those out, what grows in their place is a really thick forest. And tree density in an old growth forest is from about 50 to 100 trees per acre. And in some of these second and third growth forests, it can be as high as 500 trees per acre. Another measurement is 800 to 2,000 stems per acre. And you don't need a forestry degree to understand that that's a lot more fuel to burn, and fires can burn much hotter. So it's no surprise that because of this past mismanagement, there's been some really high severity fires. So the biggest wildfire in New Mexico's history up to that point was in the year 2000, the Cerro Grande fire, which burned into the city of Los Alamos. And that record was tripled in 2011 by the Las Conchas fire, which burned 156,000 acres. And in case you were wondering, that itself has been doubled, more than doubled, in the Calf's Creek Hermit's Peak fire, which is not in these mountains, but in the mountains east of us, the Sangre de Cristos. This slide shows some of the damage that overgrazing can do to rivers. So you see here that the sheep have trampled the stream bank, overgrazed the grasses holding the stream together. The stream has widened. It's gotten warmer with less oxygen because of the damage. So this is part of the restoration effort. So this is the same location present day, and the water quality is much better. And we actually have some of the best fly fishing in New Mexico. So that's a little window, very brief introduction to what federal land management is all about, what the Park Service does. But the Park Service is gigantic. There are 433 national park units. So not all of those are quote unquote national parks, capital N, capital P, or for example, a national preserve. There's national historic sites, there's battlefields, there's historic homes. And the most recent national park unit, the Amache National Historic Site in Colorado, was actually a Japanese internment camp during World War II. They cover every ecosystem from the tropical rainforests to what we are, high montane grasslands, to the Arctic tundra up in Alaska. So now I wanted to ask you all a question. So one of the 433 national park sites is this one. And you probably wouldn't know from the picture, but I'll give you 2 hints. This is a national park site in upstate New York and is the former home of a 19th century American president who did not speak English as his first language. So I have a hand up. Gustavo.
Was it President Van Buren?
Very good.
Yes. Thank you.
That
Gustavo.
is the Martin Van Buren National Historic Site. So
And
what they do,
And it was
Go ahead.
Dutch, his first language.
yeah, very good. His first language was Dutch. So careers in the National Park Service are very different. And even someone in the same position that I'm in, a interpretive park ranger, would have a very, very different experience at the Martin Van Buren National Historic Site than a big nature park in the American West. And Alex has actually worked at a lot of different park sites and can tell you some of his different experiences later. So I wanted to talk about jobs in the National Park Service for historians. Now, all of these are in the federal government catalog of jobs, but to be honest, I haven't seen a lot of these GS5 and GS7 positions of historians. I've mostly seen 11s or 9s, or what they call a combination series when you start out as a 9 and move to an 11. And those numbers are grades, and they refer to your rank and how much money you make. And if you notice here, and this is true of a lot of job series, the baseline is a college degree for a lot of these jobs. But if you have what the Park Service calls superior academic achievement, or above a 3.5, you actually qualify for a 7. Just as if you have an MA or master's. A master's also qualifies you for a 9. Now, another thing you'll notice, and this is true of a lot of job grades, is that years of experience count for a lot. So if you have a BA in history, you spend a year as a GS5, you can then apply for a GS7, spend a year there, apply for a GS9. That's what they call time in grade.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Do they take you in at different steps? I worked for the federal government way back when. You come in at a GS11, step 10 or step 9, depending on experience and degree?
The answer is it depends. So I came in from higher ed, and they did not give me any of the steps, but you can't go lower in pay. So, for example, if you're a GS9 step 12 and you go to a GS11, you don't start as a step 1 if that is lower pay than you were making as a GS9, if that makes sense. Another thing, I'll talk about this later with the other job series. I've personally found it confusing. There's a lot of inside baseball, so to say, with the federal hiring process. But depending how the job is listed, if it's listed for only internal applicants, those who already work for the Park Service and have done so for a year, they tend to only value experience. Meaning, I can't necessarily apply to a GS 11, even though I have a PhD in history, if I don't have the full year as a GS 9. So I don't want to complicate things too much. Feel free to ask questions, but just know there's a lot of intricacies after you get into understanding the hiring process. So some key skills to think about now as an undergraduate or graduate for a career in history in the Park Service is understanding the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. So this was passed in the Lyndon Johnson administration, famously after the destruction of Penn Station. So Penn Station was this beautiful old train building, architecturally very significant, got demolished. What replaced it was, frankly, pretty ugly. There was a national outcry that historic buildings and sites needed to be protected. And so there's a couple of components to that apply to the Park Service. One is to register historic sites and properties, in this case, those that are on your site, to the National Register. And there's 4 criteria. So I want you to take a second, and I'm happy to say these if you can't read them, and think, how does that apply to the Martin Van Buren Historic Site? So here they are. There's 4 of them. Anyone? Come on, I used to be a professor. I can wait you out.
Who's gonna jump in? Margaret?
So, really quick, I'm sorry I missed this. Does it need to embody all 4 or just one of the 4?
That's an excellent question. No, just one of them.
Okay, so I would say that it clearly is the second, associated with the lives of persons significant in our past. That would probably
Very
stand
good.
for any president, which actually makes me wonder if Trump Tower will ever fall under this.
Hilarious.
Wouldn't it be hilarious?
Right.
That would be interesting, though. It really would.
So, as Jeremy knows, I was talking about the Martin Van Buren Historic Site last time, and I hope I wasn't making fun of it, because as I found out, it's not just number 2, it's actually number 3. So after his presidency, he had these super elaborate wallpapers made in his house, and they are definitely the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction. And they have a full-time person employed in historic restoration who just hand paints the wallpaper to keep it looking like it did in the 1830s and 1840s.
That's amazing.
So a follow-up to that then, when you have something like that, and I understand if you can't like move it or whatever, but is that alone going to have it fall under the Preservation Act? Or can the argument be made, we can preserve this wall and move it to a museum and, or something along those lines?
That's a really good question. So the National Register nomination doesn't actually put any restrictions on what you can do with it. The second part does. So the second part is called Section 106. And when any federal entity does something, they literally call it in the law an undertaking. So that is, if you were building a road next to the Van Buren house, installing modern AC, right, which you probably need in upstate New York in the summer, right? You would have to go through Section 106 compliance to identify what is historic. And in a lot of cases, what's historic can also mean what's archaeological. So, for example, at our park, we're building a new entrance gate and parking lot, and you think, what's the big deal? It's right off the highway. There's a cultural site with a lot of obsidian artifacts right next to it. And that dictated where we are putting the parking lot so we don't, plow over that archaeological site. Now, it doesn't mean that nothing can be done. It just means if there are adverse effects, could potentially damage things, there has to be a resolution. So what are you doing to resolve any adverse effects from the construction? Another example out in Virginia was there were these cabins. I forget what national park site it was, but they were super historically significant from the 1930s, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, but they're falling apart. They have to put on a new roof. The roof is different than the roof that was historically, but they made a new roof out of new materials that last longer and save the entire structure. So yes, that was an adverse effect. It's no longer historical, but it resolved a lot of other bad things that would happen if you don't fix the roof. So what I would highly encourage you all is to gain experience in National Register nominations. You don't have to work for the federal government to do this. At my former college campus, we did a National Register nomination for a historic home that dated to the early 19th century that the university owned. Something that would be much harder as an undergraduate, but if you can shadow any federal management entity, would be Section 106 compliance. So if you're trying to build a new road, build a new gate, put AC in Martin Van Buren's house, how would you go about the Section 106 compliance, which is federally mandated by law? Some other skills useful for the Park Service are GIS. Very, very useful. I'm thinking of even taking a graduate class myself some point. And archaeology. So at our current park, there is some 20th century history, but the vast majority of our history is obtained through archaeology. And a lot of that Section 106 compliance requires not just a historian in many cases, but also someone with archaeology experience. Now, the division the three of us are in is interpretation, education, and public information. So we are the public-facing division of the park. We operate visitor centers, interact with hundreds of visitors every single day. We give ranger programs to the general public. Has anyone been on a ranger program at a national park site? You should go on a ranger program.
I didn't hear it.
We also do K through 12 education, educate college groups visiting the park. And then there's a whole host of what we joke about other duties as assigned. And that can go from everything from documenting cows that are illegally on the preserve to removing them from the road to preventative search and rescue to wildland fire. A lot of what people think of a park ranger is actually called an LEO, or law enforcement officer, and they're responsible for ensuring people follow the rules in the park. So, for example, if you're fishing illegally in the park, I can yap at you and tell you not to do that, but I can't actually write a ticket. A law enforcement officer has to do that. And one of the law enforcement officers at a neighboring park, Bandolier, actually started his career with a master's in history doing interpretive programming at a battlefield site in the Southeast. So once you're in, there's a lot of different paths to take. So getting into the National Park Service. So I came in a pretty non-standard way. I'm going to let Alex and Corey talk about their paths. But some general advice I have is to first gain volunteer experience. So we're always looking for volunteers to do a whole host of things, from build trails to help our visitor center to giving programs. And a lot of National Park Service sites love it when you reach out and ask to volunteer. And that counts as experience when applying for jobs. Second, we actually just hired someone in December with this, is the Pathways program. So there are certain jobs for recent BA or BS graduates, also recent MA and PhD graduates. Now, I will say there is a total hiring freeze on permanent positions in the Park Service right now. So permanent means you work year-round for the Park Service at one location. But right now, there's lots of seasonal hiring going on. And a lot of people started their Park Service career as seasonal employees. And if you have 4 seasons of work in a 5-year window, that gives you the ability to apply for what are called career positions that are not open to the general public. Finally, there are lots and lots of internships. And I emailed this PowerPoint to Professor Murray. But a lot of these are for nonprofit groups affiliated with the Park Service. We have an intern from what's known as the Fish and Feathers program. You're basically paid all summer to do fly fishing and birding. And that is a great way to have an introduction to the Park Service. And there's lots of different types of internships you can apply for. And my last slide before I turn it over to Alex and Corey, some things just to keep in mind. One, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, navigating USA Jobs sucks. It just does. But you have to embrace the suck. So I've actually talked to people who want to apply for the Park Service. They get on USA Jobs, they get so frustrated, and they stop. You have to embrace the frustration and really take the time to understand how it works and what they're asking of you. Because that's the system we have. There's also, for some of the permanent positions, these tests. They're called assessments. And they tend to be logic exams. They're kind of hard to study for, but the closest thing to them would be the LSAT. I think they're easier than the LSAT. That's to get into law school, but that's the type of questions they're asking you. And again, you just have to embrace it and do your best. Third, you have to understand some sites are more popular than others. So you all are in California, and there's a lot of people who want to work for Yosemite. So a year ago, there were 350 applicants, and that's after the application closed, for 20 seasonal positions. While some of your lesser known sites, like the Merton Van Buren Historic Site, would be much less competitive. USA Jobs resumes are funky. They're pretty close, actually, to an academic CV that you can ask your professors about in length and style. You should not use the resume, one-page resume you use for, the private sector for applying to federal jobs. Finally, you have to accept that housing can be a challenge. It's a challenge the three of us have overcome. But if you think about it, park sites are in these uber beautiful areas, oftentimes surrounded by Airbnb, vacation rental. In the case of Grand Teton National Park, Jackson Hole is where billionaires and movie stars live. And so finding a place to live on a federal government salary can be a challenge. The Park Service is taking steps to address that challenge, but it's a challenge that a lot of us have to navigate, right? You're in these beautiful areas that everyone wants to vacation in, and it's pretty hard to find an affordable place to live. So before we open up for questions, I wanted to let Alex and Corey talk briefly about their paths to the Park Service.
Thank you, Adam. I'll go first if Corey doesn't mind. But yeah, Adam, great job. That was a good overview of who we are and how to get involved in the National Park Service. That being said, we all get involved in the National Park Service in a different way. Just the three of us went complete different paths, but we all ended up at the same place. One thing I do think we all share, though, is that love and passion for our mission in the National Park Service. And that's something that I've seen in every place that I have been, and something that is hopeful and beautiful in all these places. But I want to talk a little bit about my background and how I got involved in the National Park Service. So, as it stands right now, I am just about, I'm starting my 8th year in the National Park Service. Well, let's see, it was 5 years as a seasonal park ranger, and then about 3.5 years as a permanent park ranger. And through that time, I've worked at 7 different units of the National Park Service, everything from a national recreation area to a national historical park and national preserve. But the interesting thing about the National Park Service is that there's so many different jobs, and Adam touched on a couple. A couple more, we have administration, so we have budget technicians, and we have payroll folks. We also have maintenance mechanics. We have carpenters. We have HVAC system folks. So we have such a diverse job offerings in the National Park Service. However, one thing that's interesting, Adam brought up the other duties as assigned. The same series of, Park Ranger 0025, you will do different types of programs and have different duties depending on which park that is. So, for example, when I was at the C&O Canal, one of our biggest programs that we offered were historic canal boat rides, which were challenging to do in the outskirts of Washington, D.C. in the hot, humid heat of summertime, but we overcame that. We did living history at Fort Scott National Historic Site and black powder demonstrations, which was very impactful to the public. We did canoe programs at Gateway National Recreation Area, along with seining on the bay, and just really cool recreation-based programming that touched on the demographic of people that we were serving and what their interests were. And then at Salinas Pueblo Missions, we have pristine dark skies. So we would do dark sky programs, just as we do here at Valles Caldera. We have pristine night skies. So we offer night sky programs as well as fly fishing programs and cross-country skiing. So depending on where you are at, your duties and your programs will vary, and all of that you're looking at who are you serving and how can you best serve their interests and their needs and their uses of the park, and connecting them to the resources. How I got involved in the National Park Service when I was younger, I actually started as a volunteer at the local unit of the National Park Service when I was 13 years old. And I volunteered from 13 to 18 when I became a seasonal park ranger. And I did that through college. And then after graduating, I took my first permanent position here in New Mexico, in central New Mexico, and then eventually moving on here to Valles. So basically, I took it step by step, as early and as lower on the totem pole as you can be with the National Park Service. But the experience I got as a volunteer was so valuable. And I was told by my supervisor my first season that if I didn't, I had that volunteer experience, so it put me at the top of the list. So I can't stress enough how important internships, volunteering, and just getting involved in the culture of the National Park Service, seeing how we operate. And then all it takes is the mission to give you that little bit of inspiration, and you'll go from there. So that's just a quick overview of my background, how I got involved in the National Park Service, some of the programs that I had done. And at the end, I'm sure Adam will give some time for some questions. So I am more than happy to answer some questions.
All right, on to Ranger Lycopolus.
All right. Thank you both, Adam and Alex. Hi, everyone. Ranger Corey, along with Adam. This is the very first national park unit I've worked at. And different to Adam and Alex, I took a different path in. So I am a disabled veteran. I served in the military. And that kind of set me up on a path to work civilian federal. When you're building your profile for USA Jobs and making your application, what you're doing is trying to build points. Those points come from volunteering, internships, your education. If you served in the military, if you don't want to serve in the military, you can also join the Peace Corps and serve overseas as a civilian, or AmeriCorps, serving stateside as a civilian. These are all different ways to get the points you need to help get you to the top of lists when you apply for different jobs. Not only am I a veteran, but in school for a while, like Professor Murray mentioned, I have a BFA and a BS. I got those when I was at Arizona State. I also worked a bunch of different small jobs in the Phoenix area at nature centers. I was a fellow at the Phoenix Art Museum. And then after graduating from Arizona State, got a job working with the National Audubon Society, working education at an urban nature center in Phoenix. So all those things that I did for myself, school, serving my country, fellowships, internships, all helped me create a really powerful application that allowed for me to get a permanent job with my first time working with the Park Service, which is not very common. The most common path would be the path that Alex took, working years of seasonal work while in school, post-grad, building that time and experience up. But if you do all these things to gain as many points as possible, you can get permanent jobs with your first time around, if you're lucky, if they're open up to the general public.
Thank you so much, Corey and Alex. So I wanted to open the floor up to questions. What do you all want to ask us? Daniel Gutierrez, please go ahead.
Hey there, Adam. Thank you very much for answering me. I just want to ask you a question. I think Dr. Murray mentioned you were a professor prior to being a park
Yeah.
ranger. I wanted to ask, what drove you from making that transition from working in the field of academia to working as a park ranger? What is it that the current job you have, attracted you to it, it made you want to leave your previous career?
That's a really good question. So sorry about the lighting in here.
No worries.
My previous job was at a small liberal arts college in Virginia. The college was experiencing a severe enrollment and budget crisis, so I had to get a new position. I did try to stay in higher ed. As Professor Murray knows, it can be a tight job market. I did have an on-campus interview at Utah State, but when that didn't go through, I decided to join the Park Service. Why? I'm a 19th century US environmental historian, and my first book was actually on the establishment of Yosemite in 1864, the first nature park, and then the first national park of Yellowstone in 1872. And then there were a lot of personal reasons too. So I was born and raised in Utah. All my family's in Utah. I wanted to move back west. I'm not going to lie, I'm a huge skier, and the skiing in northern New Mexico is infinitely better than the skiing in Southwest Virginia. So but I have a lot of passion for the mission of the Park Service, and what parks are in terms of American history. And so when it seemed that, higher ed was closed, I decided to join the Park Service.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Thank you very much for answering that question. I just have one more follow-up question.
Yeah.
So, like that experience as a professor, would you say that kind of benefited you in like, applying for jobs as a park ranger?
Absolutely. So I definitely wouldn't get a PhD in history just to join the Park Service, but it helped me quite a bit. I do speak two other languages, which I think helped me as well, although one of them is entirely useless in northern New Mexico. Um, and I think what it was really about, though, Daniel, was my experience in education. So I had designed a summer study program in Yellowstone National Park for college kids. So I love teaching outdoors, teaching about the history of parks, teaching about the history of fire, and all of that experience, a decade of, teaching really helped. It helps me every day in my job, and it helped me get the job.
Awesome. Thank you for the informal answer. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Daniel. And this has been really great. To hear, I don't know if you guys planned this, but you covered, I think, really perfectly so many aspects as I was sort of checking off questions that I had in terms of giving the grand scheme of things with Adam, and then one specific path with Alex, and then Corey gave this sort of kind of a point system understanding of how you can reverse engineer the perfect job applicant, which is often what I ask in these sessions is how do you sort of reverse, like if you're in charge of hiring or if you're going on the job market, how do you reverse engineer the perfect robotic, job applicant coming in? And I say robotic, of course, joking, but the sort of perfect dream applicant. And I think Corey giving that sort of point system, Alex talking about his experience, and then Adam giving this grand overview is really a very, very rich introduction in terms of what to expect, what you can expect in this job market, and making yourself the strongest possible applicant. I don't see any other hands, but I do want to ask if others have questions here. I know for me, for one, and not as useful as Adam's dissertation or degree, but I remember, same as last year, I remember getting the feeling like this sounds really good. You got sort of always have sort of nomadic academics who are ready to we got itchy feet sometimes and we're ready to roam. But this sounds really, really cool, and I love
a gee whiz question.
Terry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't all that important, but I'm curious, what's the two languages that you speak?
Hablo español y apuhun vain vahan suomea. I speak Spanish. I used to speak it better than I do now, even though I live in northern New Mexico, and I speak a bit of Finnish.
Finnish would work out.
Which is entirely useless in northern New Mexico.
Gustavo, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Murray, and also thank you to our presenters for the information. That was a lot of information. And also I guess my question was like, what is the best part about being a park ranger, um, and working for the national park, um, working for national parks, and also is it? I mean, I feel like you already answered my question, but um, is it a job that is worthwhile doing? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll let Corey and Alex talk about the favorite part. I think it's definitely worthwhile. Something we haven't talked about that I really want to press upon you is I talk to many young people and they think their next job is like their career. Like, this is what I'm going to do the next 50 years. So if you're remotely interested in the Park Service, I would take a seasonal job. See if you like it. Learn about the different divisions. Learn about, what someone in cultural resources does versus what an interpretive park ranger does. And it's pretty low commitment. It's a really beautiful place, a really neat place historically, and you can see if you can like it. And right now is when lots of this isn't that's always true, but right now 2025 March is when there's lots of seasonal jobs for parks on USA Jobs. So Alex, Corey, what's your favorite park?
So one of
go
my
ahead, Corey.
favorite parts. Oh, sorry, Alex.
I'm sorry.
So what I love about working with the Park Service as an interpretive park ranger, and why I've been in the informal outdoor education space for nearly a decade now, is just that spark in someone's eye when they're learning something new. Be that an 8-year-old on a school field trip, or an 80-year-old on vacation with their family. Um, as park rangers, we are entrusted by the public to help tell America's story. And by sharing it and encouraging people to always be learning, no matter where they are in life, is just one of the great joys that I get out of being a park ranger.
Yeah, I think Corey and Adam really hit it. Basically, the people that we serve and the special missions. So, just something that inspires me is that we're able to contribute to protecting some of what is the most important resources and stories that are here in the United States, and that we can preserve those for future generations. And then us specifically as interpreters, connecting those people to the resources through creating stories and being their storytellers. So I think that's what really inspires me, being able to carry on the torch of these special places to the next generation, and being able to be the voice of the resources, and to be able to see people's reactions when we connect them.
Hello, can you hear me? I don't know if I speak too far.
Yes, we can totally hear you.
Like every other career, there's always hardships. What are the hardships of a park ranger, and how do you overcome them?
I think one of the first hardships that I was touching on is the application process. I'm still learning new things, even though I've been in this for 2 years, on the application process, how best to apply for jobs. And the answer to that is you really just have to embrace it and try your best to not get frustrated. And especially when you're learning USA Jobs, be kind to yourself, take the time to really learn it, do the best you can. And then, I know this is a little cheesy, but I kind of live by it. You either win or you learn, right? So you either have a win, you get what you wanted, you get the job you wanted, or you learn and can position yourself better next time. I think it can be a frustration, but but it's also a source of amusement in hindsight. We all have some crazy visitor stories. One of the more tamer ones is a guy uh, kind of dressed like Kid Rock and armed, wanted to put a black bear cub in the back of his truck, and I was telling him he couldn't do that, wasn't a good idea, and he just kind of sat there and argued with me about it for a while. he didn't get the answer he wanted from me, so he asked another person who immediately called law enforcement on him. So at the time, those can be frustrating / stressful, but when I say it now, I kind of get a good chuckle out of it.
You saved his life, man. Saved his life. I was in between a black bear and or cub in the Cascades once, and I was not happy to be there. It was walking through the trail. That was.
Yeah, he thought the bear was cold because it was raining out.
I'm wondering how physically demanding the job is, and I'm assuming that this has to do with like where you are. I'm sure the Van Buren one isn't as physically demanding. But I was also wondering with regards to that, are you looking at an earlier retirement?
Here, I could take this one.
Yep,
So
go for it.
personally, I am a 100% disabled veteran. I've had multiple surgeries in my life due to my previous career, personal mishaps. So I can't do everything that Alex and Adam. They're going to both do wildfire stuff this year. I can't do that. But I do a bunch of other things. And I stay within my own wheelhouse. At our park, we have vehicles we can drive around the park. Bikes we can use to get around. I am reasonably accommodated in my job. And right now I am getting as much field time as I can before I even have to get more surgeries and about 10 years of time before I get stuck behind a desk. So it's all kind of what you get at, what you make the most of. Another thing for hiring is Scheduled A. That's, with disabilities. So you can find a hiring path based on, if you have medical diagnosis. So they are not limiting factors when it comes to being a park ranger. And like Ranger Alex said earlier, there's administrative jobs. There's facility jobs, there's maintenance jobs, there's cultural resources, natural resources. There's all types of work that contribute greatly to the mission of the Park Service. It's not just rangers like us who kind of be that public face. There's lots of other work that gets done that contributes greatly to the mission.
Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Margaret. Rochelle, do you want to jump in?
First of all, I just wanted to say thanks for all the information, you guys, because it's been a dream of mine to work at a national park. That's why I got into history after going to the Citrus National Park here in California, and I just found love with the atmosphere. My question is, I'm not asking you guys to be like fortune tellers or to see the future, because that's obviously ridiculous. But with this current administration's seeming to be attacking national parks, and a lot of people losing jobs and parks actually closing, do you guys see it still being a possibility for someone like myself to still have that dream to work at a national park? Because I honestly felt a little disheartened, within the last couple of weeks of hearing about all the stuff that's been going on. And if so, if you still think it's something that I should put my effort into, how would I be best served to use my time? Because obviously a 4-year administration can change a lot, but also it's only 4 years, if that makes any sense. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can't answer any questions, anything about.
Just a quick thank you to Adam, to Alex, to Corey for joining us today. I don't know if you have any parting words for our students here, or any final thoughts, but we've definitely gotten a lot of really valuable information into this this hour-long session here.
Thanks so much for having me and having us.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Alex. Thank you,
Thank
Corey.
you for answering my question too.
Thank you.
And thanks from Daniel in the chat. Yeah, this is really valuable. Lots of such concrete guidance and encouragement and information. Thank you so much, and good luck to you all in your work and your continued work. That's so valuable to us. Again, I said I was just out at Joshua Tree last week, taking family out. Yeah, it was great. It's always such a treat to be in, and then sequoias, and it's just amazing to go in there. I'm always struck by the idea that this place has been I don't know how to put it. I have to think about it, but it's just like so well thought out. It's just what you feel like you're in really good hands when you drive onto a national park. Onto a national park site. It's just well thought out, it's well managed, and it's thanks to the likes of you three and many others that we have these resources. So thank you.
Thank you.
It's
One
really
parting guest, kind of funny story. Deadliest animal in the Grand Canyon. What do you think it is?
Man,
Humans.
humans.
Actually, the person who said humans is right, but non-human animal. What do you think? Most dangerous?
Scorpion?
Squirrels.
Squirrels?
Squirrel?
How is that? Do people swerve to avoid them, or do they
They
carry?
get bit by squirrels. Squirrel feeding is depressingly common in the Grand Canyon.
Don't do
And then
that.
some of the squirrels are rabid. I went to a training that was last summer, and they had a whole session. How do you get people to stop feeding the squirrels? Most dangerous animal.
My sister was out at Shenandoah National Park for a year of service, and she had to get people to stop feeding the black bears. You know, it was
Squirrels
you
eat
found
my avocados, so I-
Yep.
Saying I'm rabid and I bite people?
that.
They
Thank
have
you so
signs. They have just squirrels biting people's hands and blood squirting. And right in front of that sign, I saw a family encouraging their 3-year-old to feed the squirrel.
Don't do that. Don't do it.
Yep. All right.
That's more very useful information, Adam. Thank you.
All right. My daughter's trying to grab me. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to
Bye,
shut it
thank
down.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very, very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.